Bullseye. Oh, hey. How's it going, everybody? I'm Earl, the Rookie Woodworker. And for today's video, we're going to make a dartboard cabinet. Let's go. So for this project, I'm going to be using some reclaimed lumber from some piece of furniture. I don't know what this made. I'm guessing a bed frame of some sort, but it's basically a bunch of poplar. So we'll have to mill that down and get the finish off of it and get it looking pretty. The finish that was on it was some dark walnut stain with some lacquer or a polyurethane coat on top of it. It didn't really penetrate the wood very much, so I didn't have to sacrifice much material in order to get it off. So just a few light passes through the planer and my surfaces were flat and clean. The material for this project would be 22 feet worth of this 2x8 material plus a sheet of plywood that's 5/8 thick, that's 2 foot by 4 foot, as well as some 4/4 material that came with this stuff that needs to be cleaned up as well, that is about 8 foot of material. So the first thing I want to do here is I'm going to get my 4/4 material and I'm going to chop that up an inch longer than the sides and the top and bottom of this cabinet. The reason I didn't just go ahead and lop these off at 45-degree angles now is because I wanted to make sure I got good straight edges before I did that. If you don't have good straight sides to these pieces and you go and you cut your miters right away, your miter joints won't be tight. So I wanted to do that after I got my edges nice and straight. But before I do that, I want to cut a dado in each one of these pieces for the back panel for this cabinet. While doing this, I wanted to make sure that dado is exactly the thickness of the plywood away from the edge, for reasons I'll point out later. And now I'm ready for those miter cuts, or so I think. And this is where I cut out the back panel for the cabinet. Before I go putting it all together, I want to sand it, make sure everything's nice and smooth, and if I need to hit anything with some wood filler, I'll do that at this point. But this is all going to get painted pitch black, so it's not super important on how it looks. It just needs to be smooth. And of course, it's always easier to get your sanding or any wood filling work you need done before you go putting boxes together. If you do this after you put the boxes together, it's such a pain. This makes it so much easier and so much faster for you. And for gluing it up, I've got nothing fancy. I've tried some box clamps and stuff like that, but I found that the easiest way to do it is just some wood glue and some painter's tape to hold it all together, and throw a square up there, make sure it's all nice and square before you go walking away from it. But yeah, the painter's tape holds it all together just fine. You don't have to buy those fancy clamps with straps and stuff like that. Go with the blue painter's tape. Alright, so for the most part, I have this cabinet pretty much made. I just need to work on strengthening the corners with either some dowels going through them, or I'm going to use the spline jig and put some splines in them. But for the most part, this is capable of being set to the side. But what I'm working on now is the doors. I've been hem-hauling around and thinking and overthinking and so on and so forth about these doors. But here's what I got. Here, just come here a minute. We'll get a little closer here. Okay, so the two doors are going to open up this way. That's pretty much the way every dartboard cabinet is made. I thought about to make this easier, just to make it one big door that would open up to the side, but I don't think it would look right. It's not the way any other dartboard cabinet is made, so I don't think I'm going to make this one like that. So I'm going to have two doors that open up. Now, on the insides of the door, I'm going to have 2 layers of storage for darts. So they'll basically be stored here, and then another layer of darts be stored here on the inside of the one door. And then the other door is going to have, the score sheet thing on the inside of it. And the door is not going to be like a normal door. It's actually going to have an American flag on it. And because the American flag is not the shape of a square, it's going to be like the midsection of the door. But it's not going to be like a normal American flag, as in it's just a flag. It's going to be wavy, like a carved out flag, because I can't keep this simple. So yeah, I got to manage to make a wavy flag in this door without touching the top section and the bottom section, and managed to also put storage in the back for darts and a scoreboard. So when I make the waves, it can't go through the whole way. I've decided to make these doors more complicated than any dartboard doors in history. So this should be interesting. It's going to be a challenge, and hopefully it'll be fun and not frustrating. So that probably explains pretty well why I'm using so much material on doors, because not only do I have recesses in the doors from the back, I've got waves being carved into it in the front. So these doors need to have at least 2 3/4 inches of thickness to make sure that those don't interact with each other and have enough material between them that hold the doors together. So these are going to be some beefy doors. So let's chop that material up for those doors. I'm kidding. That's not how thick it's going to be. You thought that's how thick it was going to be. No, it's going to be about half of this. Still pretty thick. So now it's time to chop all of that in half and clean the edges off so that we don't have any of that walnut stuff on the edges too. Alright, so this is everything I need for my door, plus another piece, which will probably end up being in it eventually. But figuring out how to go through with this, because the back side has to get some recesses for storing darts and having a scoreboard in there. And then the front side is getting a flag that's actually got some waves to it. So I think I'm going to focus on the front side. I'm going to make these sets of doors into 3 parts. It's going to be a top, a bottom, and then the flag, because the flag's got to get waves carved into it without touching the top and the bottom, which is why we need to do this in 3 parts. So I'll glue these together into 3 parts. I'll carve out the flag, and then I'll glue all 3 parts together. But also, before I go doing that, I want to cut those channels out of the back for the darts and stuff, because I think it's going to be a little bit big of areas to use the router for. So I think I'm going to do that with a dado blade, and then when I glue them up, hopefully it all lines up perfectly and works out great. So the first thing I need to do is I need to figure out what the height of the flag is going to be, considering how wide the flag is. And then I need to get that panel to be the exact width of the height of that flag. And then I need to get the top and the bottom pieces to basically build up this door to perfectly cover the box. So yeah, there's going to be a little bit of math involved in that, and then we'll probably have to do some milling down some wood to get that right. Yeah, let's get to it. The first thing that should be done here is you should count out how many pieces is going to make up your flag, because it's going to be a little bit more than what is needed to make up your flag, and you'll have to mill down one of those pieces to try to get it down to the actual height of your flag. Once you have that right, then you can plan out where your recesses on the inside of the door can be. But because we're carving up each individual piece, it's a good idea to mark a line down the sides of all of those pieces. That way, and make it a squiggly line. That way, whenever you line all those pieces up, you can line up your squiggly lines through all of those pieces, and everything is exactly where it needs to be when it comes time to glue all of this stuff back together. But yeah, we not only want to cut out all of our recesses before we glue our 3 big chunks together, we also want to drill out the holes where our darts are going to slide into their positions. I made this door so that it can hold 14 darts, so there's 4 complete sets of darts plus 2 extras. Now at this point I'm just going to let the dado blade do some eating. My setup for measuring these out, I have my fence set up at my starting point, and then I have a piece of wood back there clamped to the table saw that measures out my ending point. Then I use my handy dandy setup blocks to set it up for my depth. Yeah, when you're setting a depth like this, you want to always raise your blade up to the height that you want. You don't ever want to lower it down to the height that you want. You want to raise it up, and then that's where it should be set. Even with the tight tolerance of the machining of the threads for your table saw, whenever you lower it down to a height, you end up leaving a little bit of slack within those threads, and then when you start cutting, that blade will drop a little bit to take up that slack. It's not much, but it's enough that your first piece won't be the same depth as your last piece. And then this is where I'm drilling my holes for the dart storage. And now it's time to stack them up and see how this thing's going to look. I like it. Now it's time to glue up the 3 chunks of these doors. Now be careful not to put glue somewhere where you're not going to glue stuff together, because it'll be a pain to have to sand that off later. And it's really easy to do that in a situation like this. Alright, so now I need to draw out my pattern for the waves and the flag. I'm not going to do anything fancy or make any precise measurements. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take a board, I'm going to find an angle that I like, probably about like that, and I'm just going to start drawing pencil lines. Now I'll put the board on that line there again. Draw a line. Go on down across this flag just like this until I'm done. Now when I hog out some material, I'm going to stay away from the lines and try to deepen up these spaces that are between the lines. Let's get to it. Don't mind me dancing around here at the beginning. For some reason, every time I use this thing, I don't remember that I need to put some stops all around this thing so that it don't slide all around the table. This time here is no different than any other time. I keep on forgetting that. Now you might be noticing that this angle grinder is eating a lot more material than what it normally would when you're using one of those sandy flappy wheels that you normally would put on one of these angle grinders. And that's because I'm not using one of those. I'm using a tool called a turbo plane. This tool is really awesome at taking away a lot of material in a little bit of time. It's made by a company called Arbortech, and they make a lot of power carving tools and attachments for angle grinders and stuff like that. It's definitely worth checking out if you get into carving flags like this on a regular basis. I'm going to put a link in the description below to this one, as well as another one they make called the Industrial Wood Carver that I think would be good for this as well. It's a little bit on the pricey side, but if you make these flags on a regular basis, I think you're going to find that it's going to pay itself off because of the amount of flappy sandy wheels that you're not going to use up on these projects, as well as the time you end up saving, because this thing hogs this out pretty quick and makes pretty quick, easy work out of this project. but you're still going to want to keep one of those flappy sandpaper wheels around. And that's because you're just going to use it as the next step. Instead of using it to carve the flag out, you're going to use it to smoothen out the little divots and stuff that the Arbortech turboplane ends up leaving in the wood. It's just a good natural next step. And you won't use like maybe a quarter of the wheel on this step. Unfortunately, my waves are just wide enough that it's a natural transition over to my orbital sander, and I start out with 40 grit and work my way up to 220 with this process. Now here's where things got a little bit sideways for me. I for some reason thought it was a good idea to tape off everything that wasn't dark in the flag, and then I was going to use a torch to darken up all the spots that there was no tape on, as if the torch wasn't going to burn the tape off. And it turned into a whole mess and a big waste of time. But yeah, I tried all sorts of stuff like trying to protect the tape with a roller and da 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 da. But it turns out that blue painter's tape is pretty flammable stuff, and it's going to burn right along with the wood, and it's going to be a mess, because as it turns out, blue painter's tape does leave a ton of residue when it's on fire. So yeah, that happened. Things were thought up of, and things were tried, and things turned out to be mistakes. So now we just go over it with the sander and erase those mistakes, and then figure out how to do it correctly. Alright, so that didn't work out for me at all. I went ahead and sanded everything right back off. I'm not going to try that again quite yet. The next thing I'm going to go with is the laser engraver. The reason I didn't go with the laser engraver to begin with is because the flag is wavy. And with laser engravers, there's a specific height of your laser that has the tightest focus. So whenever you get it too close, the beam gets a little wider. Whenever you have it too far away, the beam gets wider again. So when it's not like right in that perfect spot where the beam is nice and finely focused, it might not give you a clean laser engraving. And that's kind of why I didn't go with that to begin with. So I'm going to try it out and see what it ends up looking like. The worst thing that's going to happen, I'm going to have to sand it all off and then go with something else. But yeah, I'm going to try this out and see what happens. Say a prayer for me. Okay, so it's been about a day of this thing burning, and I am pleasantly surprised at how well it's actually turning out. Yeah, so I was worried about nothing. But the only thing that sucks about this is going to take 2 days on this thing for this thing to get completed. But otherwise, yeah, this is a winning choice, I think. Alright, so now it's time to start thinking about how this thing's going to hang up. And what I'm going to go with is a French cleat system. Basically, this whole box is going to be filled with a piece of plywood that has a cut at the top here that's at an angle. And that angle is going to give it what it needs to hold on to hang onto the wall. The top piece is going to be attached to the box, and the bottom big chunk is going to be attached to the wall. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the center out of the big piece that's in here at the bottom of this box. And the reason I'm going to do that is for whenever you mount your dartboard inside the box, that way you can use screws like this and it won't push against this piece of wood and try to push the whole thing out from the wall, if that makes sense. Being that this thing's heavy and this is what's going to mount it to the wall, I'm going to go with a double whammy, and I'm going to glue and screw this thing into the back of this box. But basically you want to cut a square the same size as the box, or a little bit shorter than the same size as the box, and you want to cut near the top of that square at 45 degrees, and that little sliver that you cut off is what you saw me installing there. And with the skinny piece attached to the top of the cabinet and the big piece attached to the wall, what happens is those angled cuts come back together, and then those angled cuts makes a bond that holds it to the wall. Then at the bottom, I'm going to put some threaded inserts in through the bottom so that I can send a bolt up there that holds those two pieces together. That way you would have to take that bolt out in order to pull it off of the wall. But these threaded inserts are basically like giant wood screws that have a hole drilled right through the middle of them. You drill your hole for the wood screw, and then you just put an Allen wrench in there because that hole is cut for an Allen key to fit it, and then you just screw it right into the hole that you pre-drilled. And then this is where that bolt will go through, applying pressure to the piece that's going to be mounted to the wall, pulling the cabinet down onto that piece, making the French cleat lock in place so that it can't fall off of the wall. So now I'm going to use my corner doweling rig to drill holes straight through the corners of these miter joints for this box. And then I'm going to stick a dowel in there, and those dowels are going to add strength to my mitered corners. And now it's time to start adding dowels to those corners to add that strength that I'm looking for. So what I'll do here is I'll put an abundance of glue through the top of that hole, and then I'll twist that dowel down through that hole, making sure that that twisting motion gets the glue to spread throughout that hole the whole way around it, the whole way through. That way it gets a really good glue bond. Sometimes it gets really tough to shove that dowel down through the hole, and it gets tempting to drill out the hole to be a little bit bigger than what the dowel rod is, but I find that whenever you go a little bit bigger, you end up with a joint for that dowel that don't look that good, and then you lose that strength that you're looking for. So I think it's really worth the pain and the hassle of fighting that dowel through there for the good looking joint that you get. Okay, well, sometimes it is. Now what you can do here is you can knock these little nubbins off with the flush cut saw. It'd be pretty easy that way. A lot of times if I start with 40 grit sandpaper, I'll just use that because it knocks them off pretty quick. Now I'm going to mark out and drill my holes for some screws that's going to hold the dartboard in place. I want to make sure I do this before paint, that way if I end up with any blowout or anything like that, I can take care of it before paint and it'll be perfect whenever it's all said and done. But now I can set that to the side and get back to my doors where I'm going to glue my three big pieces together. We're ready to rock and roll with this. Now I made sure to put my glue on the ends of the flag and not on the top and bottom piece, because there's some spots there that you don't want to have glue on because it's going to be a pain to sand if there's glue there later. But after the glue dried, I trimmed up the ends, and now it's time to cut this one big door into two doors. This is one of the scariest cuts of the year. You don't want to mess this one up. Now it's time to start painting. For this, I just rolled on and brushed on 3 coats of dark cabinet paint the whole way around the cabinet box and then the inside of our doors. Before I go spraying any finish on the front of this flag, I'm going to use my micro zip sander. It's a flexible sander that can fit to the contours of this flag. And I'm going to use that to sand off all of the extra burn marks that kind of creep over into the wood away from the spots that's supposed to be burned whenever you use a laser engraver. And then I'm going to use an air line and clean off any excess debris before I go spraying any finish on this. Then I'm just using a spray-on lacquer with 3 coats. The spray-on lacquer will make it easy with how rough textured this is, and I don't want to wipe across the burn marks while I'm spreading the lacquer on this thing. So I'm going to use a spray lacquer. It'll be a lot easier, a lot better. I'm actually going to install the rubber stoppers for my doors before I install the doors, because these doors are so heavy that whenever I install the doors, I think I'll end up beating up the paint before I get the stoppers installed. So I'm going to install the stoppers first. That way I prevent that to begin with. I went with these long 24-inch hinges to go for the whole set of doors because I figured they'd be nice and strong, and they have kind of a nice look to them. So this is what I went with for these. The only problem with this style of hinge is you got to get it right the first time you install it, because there's no second chances of getting things aligned. So it's touch and go, and it's really really scary. In most applications, I think using a set of recessed regular cabinetry hinges would work out fine here. And they're nice and adjustable. They got a couple adjustment points in the hinges itself, so that if they're a little bit misaligned, you can work it out that way. And now it's time to install the door magnets. So the nice thing about these dartboards is it has this little tiny nipple there that shows you exactly where the dead center of the dartboard is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pre-drill a little bit of a hole there, and then we'll use that to line it up with a hole in the back of our dartboard cabinet so that we can get the screw through there, hit the hole exactly, and put that center screw in. This whole thing wasn't easiest to do with my short arms. I probably could have mounted this before I did the doors. But then again, if this dartboard wears out, the next dartboard that gets installed is going to have to be installed with the doors installed anyway. So, you know, I guess this is what it is. Well, at least it's looking like it was easy with my camera angles and stuff. And as soon as we get it straight so that it's straight up and down, I put in a second screw. Second screw also helps hold it, but it also stops it from twisting off of that first screw and getting crooked. And now I can install my scorecard. I made a little bit extra room on the sides of the scorecard because I thought about putting some hangers to hang the chalk up there, but the hangers was kind of like just eating away at the chalk when I tried to slide the chalk on the hangers before I even installed them. And I just didn't think that was overall a good idea to put them on. We'll just use the little tray there to store the chalk instead. But yeah, it might look a little bit goofy with a little bit extra width there on the sides, but overall, I still don't think it looks that bad, though.
Bullseye!
Well, that is it for this build. If you enjoyed this video, do me a favor and hit that like button. If you want to see more content like this, hit the subscribe button. My channel's full of content just like this. But for now, feel free to check out one of the other videos that are popping up on the screen somewhere around you any second now. And until next time, make something awesome.